All right. This is a critical context presentation on James Baldwin, a man who I'm very inspired by and one I'm sure many of you have also been influenced by. And if you haven't heard of him or know less about him, one I hope I can uh, bring to the same level of interest. Uh, it's hard to speak of James Baldwin, as no one can more eloquently speak on his life and lessons than he could, but I'll try my best here. Baldwin's first a writer and an artist, and as we'll get to, he's also a skilled orator, a profound thinker and essayist, and one of the most important figures of the civil rights era. To give the Wikipedia type context, Baldwin was born in Harlem in 1929 to a single mother, whom he doesn't really speak too much on in what I've seen. His mother, however, married a man named David Baldwin, who was a preacher and worked at a bottling factory. Baldwin was, even though he was a stepfather, Baldwin was very influenced by him. He viewed him as a father figure and in a lot of ways lived in his footsteps. Baldwin had 8 younger siblings by this stepfather, but due to overworking and having to raise the family himself, his father became an alcoholic and kind of a turbulent figure and died when Baldwin was, I believe, 18. The household was sort of torn apart, but James Baldwin sort of became the head of the household. It's clear that his stepfather influenced him because Baldwin also became a preacher at age 14. He carried the church with him through a lot of his life, I think. You can see it in his oratory style of very slow and methodical preachiness. And I would argue it's why his voice feels so weighty and everything he says feels so important. This extends to his writing too. I think it mirrors it in a lot of ways. In Everyone's Protest novel, he wrote, "It is the power of revelation which is the business of the novelist, this journey towards a more vast reality which must take precedent over all other claims." As you can see, it clearly sort of shares that sentiment. In 1948, he left America in a certain hopelessness, disillusioned by white people's inability to see in themselves that their whiteness was founded on not wanting to be black, which no amount of accommodations would mend in his own actions, that nothing Baldwin could do, or the black community generally. In short, he felt alienated. He wanted to find himself, piece himself back together however he could, and writing and living what he couldn't at home. And because by escaping, he could sort of examine the double consciousness from afar. At least that was his hope. It's during this time he really developed himself and is acclaimed. He found community with other members of society forced to the fringe. I think he was with the Algerians in Paris and Meeting the Man. He also did some of his most prolific writing in Go Tell It to the Mountain, Notes of a Native Son, in Giovanni's Room, really earning a name for himself back home and a white audience. Unfortunately, to white liberal readers, he was an activist and a revolutionary. He rejected both these labels, believing himself simply an artist trying to speak to his community through fighting his own struggles. Paris, after a while, he began to see was plagued by many of the same problems as America. The issues of race in America were a global issue in his view. In Meeting the Man, he tells an imposing interviewer with patient frustration, "What have I escaped? Where, anyway, would I go to escape?" He believed there was a global crisis of love, that we escape from the church and God instead of embodying the essence and soul of charity, sacrifice, and care it's really trying to preach and get at. Like the religion is misguided in a way. In the same interview, he famously says, "Love has never been a popular movement, and no one has ever really wanted to be free. The world is held together by the love and the passion of very few people." I think it's clear Baldwin wanted to be one of those few people. And he lived as if he was. And I would say he was. So for wanting to, again, share the love with this community and due to the rising momentum of the civil rights movement, Baldwin returned to the US, where he primarily resided until 1970. He then later moved back to France and until for the rest of his life when he died in 1987. All right. Sort of dipped into it already, but after listening to and reading so much of him, I really think it's important to center his project, the big ideas and guiding principles, which I think sort of are interlaced throughout every work and speech he makes. I've listed here what I thought were his big projects. This isn't really a objective list or from anyone else, just things I sort of took away. I'll try and articulate each. On confronting white oppression, Baldwin spends his life with a lot of spite and frustration towards white people. In this, he's less interested in addressing systemic and interpersonal racism, though he certainly thinks they're important things to address, than he is in questioning how race embeds itself in how we think of each other. Race to him is invented by white fear, rarely embodied by Black people, but always imposed from the fearing white. And it is this imposition, this unaddressed fear and insecurity of the other in the white man, that is tearing both parties apart in different ways. Obviously, Black people get the brunt of that, and until it can be addressed, I think he believes that no real substantial progress can be made in the racial struggle that civil rights sought, and I don't know, his whole life was fighting towards. And obviously, we're still not at that point. But I think Baldwin sort of elucidates the crux of the issue, which I think is important. On identity, Baldwin was Black, gay, grew up poor, he was an expatriate, and he believes that all these labels act on him in separately, informing, but sort of come together into a complete whole. They're not working in isolation. Informing both his identity and his place in the world. In many ways, because of this, he was denied from the start the possibility of being a man, of having a chance at success in the white world, and thus he sees this as a source of power in his writing, as hitting the jackpot, as he refers to it. In Giovanni's room, for example, he's confronting himself in the inner turbulence of his own sexual identity, reconciling with his alienation from American society, and pushing back on the guilt and violence of conformity. I've not read all of his work, of course, but I'm pretty sure he extends this in the other pieces to different parts of himself. I think Notes of a Native Son was about his upbringing, and perhaps he even talks about them intersectionally in others. I don't really know. Mental transformation I've kind of covered, but he's always doing what he can to free and advance his mind from social restraints, and I think his life has, in a lot of ways, served as an important model for a lot of Black queer artists seeking a similar liberation and being able to express themselves freely. He also gave a blueprint for just reconciling generally, which can be seen in a lot of his fans in the face of white oppression, but really any form of oppression. I definitely get a lot of it from a lot of value from how he separates queerness from these things. And then he sort of gives it isn't just a personal blueprint, but also a spiritual one, which brings us to our next point. I read Go Tell It to the Mountain over the summer, in which Baldwin analyzes the church at as the center of Black community, for better and worse. It, for better, brings people together to sing and preach, share ideas, even in the worst eras of oppression, like Black churches existed during slavery. But it also, for the worse, occupies a corrupting role in many lives, asserting patriarchy and a rigid morality that, if not properly quantified, can scare Black people into the very white power structures that gave them an escape to. Baldwin speaks later in distance of the church and its icons, yet firmly holds throughout his whole life of an authentic Christian morality, and the value of that if it can be separated from the oppressive fear and escapism that is contained in a lot of religious teachings and doctrine. Then bundling these last two together, Baldwin holds little hope and a lot of spite towards the system, especially in a lot of the earlier interviews I saw. He was very impatient a lot of the time with questions he didn't see to be valuable, which I don't blame him. They irritated me just listening to it. I think he still preaches hope and to his children, or to children, and a lot of people generally, because he believes in the future in a lot of ways, and the strength of family and community, that maybe these things can be overcome, if not between races, then at least within one's community. And there's a lot of love of the individual and of like intimacy at a small scale, but there's a little bit of disdain for the collective. He does this a lot, I noticed, especially in the conversation with Nikki Giovanni, which I linked. But in speaking, he refers to individuals a lot of the time, including himself, as representatives of their age, identity, sex, race, whatever. He's always speaking at a loftier and indirect level, never really accusing or demanding of the other party, just asking them to listen and then himself listening, which I think is what makes him a really effective speaker. He always feels very pragmatic yet unwavering in his principles, at least so far as I've seen. And that's what I think really gets me to feel and stick with a lot of what he's saying at every point, every sentence. Um, that's really all I've got to say about Baldwin. Most of it you should get from the man himself. I've listened to a few works and conversations by him and featuring him here, news interviews, and the like, all of which I went through my research and all of which I'd recommend. I can send you any of them after class, but really just looking him up on YouTube, practically any video you'd find of him will be worth listening to. And that's it. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you got some value. Hope you like Baldwin. Hope you look into him more.